Today we're going to get into a really tough story. It's a case out of Australia that has pulled back the curtain on a global network of just unimaginable cruelty. Now, the details are difficult for sure, but it's so important to understand how something like this operates right under our noses.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the horrific discovery itself, and then we'll take a look at the individuals who've been accused. From there, we'll unpack this disturbing ritualistic element, which is key to understanding this. Then we'll zoom out and see the global network at play. And finally, we'll talk about the push for harsher justice and the really profound questions this case forces us to ask.
So how in the world did this all come to light? Well, it all kicked off with a police task force in New South Wales, and they stumbled upon what they would later call one of the most depraved and disgusting child abuse rings they had ever encountered.
And if you want some perspective on just how bad this was, listen to this. That is a direct quote from a judge. A judge with 2 decades of experience on the bench, 20 years of seeing the absolute worst of humanity, and this was the worst thing they had ever seen. That one sentence just tells you everything you need to know about the level of horror we're talking about here.
And it became clear almost immediately that this wasn't just some small local problem. No, the investigation quickly started to unravel this huge, sprawling network. We're talking over 140 people connected to this. And the trail didn't stop in Australia. It went to the US, to Canada, all over Europe, and to New Zealand. This thing was truly global. All right, so who are the people actually at the center of this? Who has been charged? Now, I have to be really clear here, just as the source material is. These are alleged offenders. The wheels of justice are still turning. The source does publicly name several of the men who have been charged, and what's so unsettling is that these aren't cartoon villains living in some dark castle. They come from what look like totally ordinary backgrounds. One was reportedly a property manager from Sydney. It just goes to show how these monsters can hide in plain sight.
And this next part is particularly chilling. One of the accused was a former swimming coach. Think about that for a second. It's just a terrifying breach of trust, right? A position that is all about authority and access to kids was allegedly twisted and used for the most horrific purposes imaginable.
Okay, so you might have seen the words ritualistic or occult pop up in relation to this case, and that's understandably caused a lot of confusion and speculation. So what do they actually mean when they say that? What is this occult angle?
Right, so this is a really key distinction. The source is very clear. This ritualistic part wasn't about some kind of religious belief or satanic cult. Not at all. It was actually a shared obsession among these individuals. They used occult symbols and staged scenes to make the abuse even more psychologically extreme, to push it to the absolute outer limits of depravity. Now let's zoom out for a second, because this one case, as horrifying as it is really just a window into a much bigger global problem. We're not just looking at one isolated group here. We're looking at one piece of a vast, disgusting industry that operates across borders.
Get ready for this number. It's just staggering. An expert cited in the source estimates that there are 500,000 daily live streams of child abuse flowing into Australia, and that's from Southeast Asia alone. 500,000. It's a horrifying way to measure the sheer demand that's fueling this whole criminal enterprise.
And you know what? These criminals are smart in the worst possible way. They adapt. When the COVID lockdowns hit and they couldn't travel, the source explains how they just pivoted to this live stream model. They'd use untraceable crypto to pay for it, they'd coach the abusers remotely on exactly what to do, and then they'd stream the whole horrific thing live. So when you hear about all of this, the scale of it, you're probably asking, what happens to these people? Unsurprisingly, this case has sparked an intense debate about whether the current punishments are anywhere near tough enough.
And here's a really crucial point that's being raised. It's about money. Right now, an offender can go to prison, declare bankruptcy to get out of paying victims in civil lawsuits, and then they can get out of jail and still access their government-mandated retirement funds. The proposal here to close that massive loophole, let victims claim that money, and make sure these perpetrators walk out of prison with absolutely nothing. Now, this quote from a solicitor in the source, it's blunt, but man, it captures a really deep frustration in society right now. It speaks to this feeling that the system isn't working, that it's failing to protect kids, and that it's pushing parents to feel like being personally intimidating is the only real defense they have left.
Okay, so punishment is one thing, but the source also gets into the much harder topic, prevention. How do we stop these crimes before they even happen? And this is where the answers get a whole lot less clear.
And this leads us to these fundamental, almost impossible questions. What makes a person do this? Is there any way to spot at-risk people early on? Is it a learned behavior, part of a cycle of abuse? And maybe the biggest question of all, how do we get rid of the audience, the demand that fuels this entire dark economy in the first place?
And that really brings us to the final, haunting question that the source leaves us with. After looking at the crime, the criminals, the global network, the calls for justice, we're still left with this. How do we stop it before it gets to this point? It's a question about root causes, about the blind spots in our society, and about the immense challenge of preventing a horror that, for most of us, is just completely incomprehensible.